Hello and welcome to this tips and techniques video from Master Your Photography. In this series we've carefully crafted a collection of short videos designed to provide you with key points on specific topics without any of the unnecessary waffle. Our goal is to give you practical information that you can immediately apply to your own photography. We understand that your time is precious, so we've condensed each video to deliver concise, actionable information. With our tips and techniques series, you'll gain the knowledge and the confidence to improve your photography in no time at all. So, that's probably enough waffle, let's get started. The world of macro and close-up photography is absolutely fascinating. It reveals hidden worlds in everyday objects as you get closer and closer to your subject. So what do we actually mean by macro photography? Because this term is used in general to describe anything that is close-up. In its truest sense, macro photography is where the image that's recorded is a one-to-one ratio with the real-life subject. So in other words, whatever size your subject is in real life, it's actually recorded at exactly that size on the image sensor in your camera. The example on the left here is a true macro photograph of white granulated sugar crystals. You wouldn't necessarily know it was those without being told, and that's the beauty of macro photography. It reveals these hidden worlds when you zoom in so close on a subject that it becomes unrecognisable. You'll sometimes come across macro photos that are even closer in than a one-to-one ratio. By contrast, a close-up photo is the description that we should use for anything where we have photographed just a small portion of our subject. So we've basically zoomed in on a small area of the whole thing. The photo on the right is technically a close-up photograph of some frozen blueberries. It's not a macro shot because it's not been taken so close in that it's a one-to-one ratio, so we would class this as a close-up. So that's the definition of macro and close-up out of the way. Don't get too hung up about it. It really doesn't matter what you call each image, whether it is macro or close-up. The important thing is that you do understand the difference and you're taking creative images. Now, if you're using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera and you want to take true macro photos, then you will need a macro lens. A macro lens is like an ordinary lens, but it lets you focus a lot closer to be able to achieve these one-to-one ratios. I would suggest a good starting point would be a focal length between 50 and 100 millimeters. That's going to allow you to take images like the two that you see here. The left-hand side one is a close-up of a hypodermic needle on a syringe with a water droplet, and the right-hand image is actually the very edge of a white feather on a black background. But you don't need to go out and spend a fortune on buying lots of new equipment to be able to do close-ups. If you've got a bridge camera or even just a smartphone, then you can use various close-up adapters, and smartphones, a lot of them do actually have a macro mode built in nowadays, which will allow you to get very, very close to a subject. Anything that has an interesting pattern to it, or maybe some texture or some colour, can be used to create really interesting macro or close-up images. When it comes to lighting, then a broad, soft, diffused light source works really, really well. But try to use it maybe from one side so that it does create some shadow, but those shadows will be soft and will reveal the shape of the object that you're photographing. If you're using daylight, then it's usually best to avoid direct sunlight if you can. If you're shooting indoors, then a north-facing window will give you lovely soft northern light, if you're in the northern hemisphere, that is. One of the problems, which can be turned to an advantage with macro photography, is the very shallow depth of field that you will get. What I mean by depth of field is the amount of your photograph that is in focus from foreground through to background. In general, when you go close in on a subject, the depth of field becomes very, very shallow. But you can use this to create depth within the image by deliberately having the foreground and background out of focus. It works really well on this image, which is actually a car windscreen on a frosty morning. If you want to maximise the depth of field and therefore the amount of your image that's actually in focus, then you need to be using a medium to small aperture. say f8 or higher than that. So this particular image here was shot at f16, but you can see even at f16 the front of the flower head is actually in focus, but as you move through to the background then it starts to go out of focus. You can stop your lens down even further, say f22 or 32 or even 64, but what you will find is that although technically that will give you more in focus, the overall quality of the image will be degraded because most lenses don't operate at their best quality once you start to hit the limits of their aperture range. One solution to this problem is to use a technique called focus stacking. This involves taking multiple images with different focus points, and then in post-production the images are stacked on top of each other and then seamlessly blended by the software to give you a result that has focus from foreground right through to background. It's also worth mentioning that a tripod is a really useful accessory for doing any kind of macro work, because it will lock your camera down solidly so that you're not going to suffer from any kind of camera movement, which can be an issue when you're focused that close to your subject. For the absolute best results, you should also be using a shutter release cable or a remote shutter release, and also it's worth considering using manual focus rather than automatic. The automatic modes can sometimes struggle to find the correct focus point when you're focused so close to your subject. A tripod is also a really good idea if you're trying to photograph anything that moves. In the case of insects, it's really useful to be able to lock down the camera, focus on a flower or leaf or wherever you think your subject will land, and then basically just wait. Pre-focus your camera where you think the subject will land, and then sit and wait. And it can be a waiting game, but the results are worth it when you get that shot. Start to look for close-up opportunities in your everyday life. You'll soon learn how to spot them and find that you can actually create these kind of images using nothing more than a very standard basic camera or even your smartphone, which is a very capable device nowadays. Look for unusual angles, shots such as this one where the smartphone has been placed on the ground and we've got this lovely vibrant close-up of some tulips growing in a field. Once you've taken your close-up photos, you can then of course enhance them further using post-production techniques. Here we've got a photo of some seaweed on a beach. The left-hand image is the original image, and then in post-production on the right-hand image we've increased the saturation and the contrast and just made the picture just that little bit more interesting. So whatever camera equipment you have, or even if it's just a smartphone, next time you're out and about, look for those close-up images and see what you can create. Thank you for tuning in to Master Your Photography's Tips and Techniques series. We hope you found this video useful and practical. Remember, each photo you take is a stepping stone towards becoming a better photographer. So get out there and capture the world in your own unique way. Until next time, happy shooting.